All right, we'll get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's panel discussion focused on career skills after a PhD. I'm Kyle Bushik, and Jess Lamb is the co-moderator for today, although she has been having some internet trouble, so we'll see. Hopefully she can join us. We are both members of the DOE Basic Energy Science Early Career Network, and we are part of a committee that's been organizing this event for you today. And we hope that you, the audience, will also be getting involved in the conversations by submitting questions during the event using the Q&A feature of the webinar. We will be monitoring this live, and we'll have some time to answer these questions towards the end. Of course, with our time limits, we'll only be answering some of the most popular questions, so please do upvote or comment on the questions you would most like to see answered. So to begin our session, I'd like to welcome our four panelists who have graciously volunteered their time to participate in this discussion with us. Dr. Don Adine, Dr. Paul Dauenhauer, Dr. Eric Draeger, and Dr. David Moore. All four have taken different career paths to where they are now, and we hope that this representation helps illustrate the many options available to you, early career scientists, after completing your PhD. We'll begin with having each panelist give a brief introduction to themselves and their career pathway, and then we'll dive right into our discussion. So without further ado, Dr. Adine, if you'd like to begin by introducing yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Kyle. So my name is Don Adine, as Kyle said. I'm a program manager in the Office of Sciences at Office of Science at DOE in the Biological and Environmental Research Program. The portfolio that I manage supports how microbes can convert feedstocks like lignocellulosic biomass or synthetic polymers to useful biofuels and bioproducts. I also manage pieces of our environmental microbiology portfolio where we're looking at the role that the soil microbiome plays in sort of biogeochemical cycling across time and space scales, which has obvious impacts to soil carbon sequestration. My scientific work background, I received my PhD in microbiology from the University of Georgia, go Dogs. For my postdoc, I moved to the UC San Diego, where I worked at a startup that was embedded at UC San Diego, working on cyanobacterial biofuels and bioproduct production. After my postdoc, I was able to receive AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, which allowed me to work at the Department of Energy in the Office of Science, but in Basic Energy Sciences, where I had the opportunity to help out with the Energy Frontier Research Centers program, assisting with core research program management, and working on increasing science communications. I've been at DOE now for almost 12 years this September, and 8 of that I've spent as a program manager in my current program. So I'm excited to be here today.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Next, we'll have Professor Paul Dauenhauer.
Hi, I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Chemical Engineering and Material Science. My research is in the area of catalysis. I've been a professor for about 14 years. I worked for Dow Chemical for 1 year before that. And before that, I did my PhD at the University of Minnesota and my undergraduate degree at the University of Wisconsin. Since I've been at Minnesota, I've had the opportunity to start 3 companies: Ceronics Renewables, Lockrell Technologies, and a new company called Carba. And I'm currently the director of the Center for Programmable Energy Catalysis and Energy Frontier Research Center, funded by the U.S. Department of Energy.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Next, Dr. Eric Draeger.
Hi, I'm Eric Draeger. I'm at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, where I'm a group leader in the Center for Applied Scientific Computing. I'm also the director of our High Performance Computing Innovation Center. And one of my main activities right now is I'm the deputy director for application development of the DOE Exascale Computing Project, which is a cross-lab effort by DOE. I actually started as a physicist. I got my PhD from the University of Illinois in condensed matter physics in 2001. I joined Livermore as a postdoc in physics. I did not intend to stay here my whole life, and I did not actually intend to go into high performance computing and CS. It just sort of happened. So I'll be happy to talk about how that happened in the Q&A.
Perfect, thank you. And last but certainly not least, Dr. David Moore.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Moore. I am the Carbon Capture Technology Leader at GE Research in upstate New York, Niskayuna, New York. I've been at GE for 20 years. I actually got my PhD in organic chemistry back in 2003 at Cornell University, making polymers from carbon dioxide. So I've kind of come full circle over the last 20 years or so. When I joined GE in 2003, I worked on fuel cells, polymer electrolyte membranes for fuel cells and automotive applications. Then moved into desalination, membrane purification for oil and gas industry, for biological materials like the Gardasil and antibody cocktails that were used for COVID. Then actually became the lab manager for the membrane and separation technology. So entered into the management back in 2011. After that, I started to lead a large team, about 35 folks. Chemists, material scientists, chemical engineers, process engineers, leading up the material physics and chemistry team at GE Research. And over the last 3 years, I've been working on this platform that I like to call Air to Dollars, which is about utilizing sorbent-based technologies to remove water, CO2 from the ambient air and convert that into drinkable water, potable water, as well as doing carbon capture for sequestration and utilization. Pleasure to be here today.
Perfect. Thank you all. So hopefully this gives our audience a sense of the breadth of experiences and pathways that our panel has. And so we'll get started with a relatively simple question that maybe comes from this pathway. But how did your studies in graduate school shape your career choices? And especially kind of in this early career phase when you were deciding what to do next. And so we'll start with Eric Draeger, as you have mentioned that you had maybe a bit more of a circuitous route.
Absolutely. So I got my PhD in physics and I wanted to do a postdoc in physics and I got that job. So I would say that was a very straightforward jump. Where I was not prepared for where I ultimately ended up was the fact that as a physicist, I really thought the main thing I needed to learn was just as much physics as possible and that everything else was sort of optional. And in fact, for my career, the most important skills have not been deep physics knowledge. It has been things like, how do you communicate and sell a new idea to an audience that is not your domain? And then also very personally, I would say software engineering. Physicists are notoriously overconfident programmers, i.e. bad. And I definitely fit that stereotype. So there was a lot I had to learn to kind of move into new areas. Yeah, so part of it is just simply realizing that it's not all technical. You have to learn other things to be successful.
Perfect. Dr. Jean, if you'd like to follow up.
I would agree. I think there's a lot there of trying to figure out, how to communicate to people that are outside. Science is so much more multidisciplinary than many of us even imagine. I mean, I'm a microbiologist, and when you're doing your thesis, everything is very focused and you're very, tight on a particular question or a particular topic. And science is much broader than that. And I think that was one of the pieces that definitely I wish I would have had a more opportunity to work in team science and do a lot more conversations with other people and communicate, because it's not always the same. As a biologist, working at the Department of Energy, which is very much more mathematics and physics and chemistry, I get a lot of like, what in the world is biology doing at DOE, and communicating that. We've had a lot of opportunity to try to communicate why biology is important. So I agree that the communications piece is a huge component of being able to communicate to non-experts as well as really smart people who are not in your field. I think is a really challenge for all of us.
Perfect. Thank you. And Dr. Moore.
Yeah, no, I would only echo those comments. When I got my PhD from Cornell, I worked in making polymers from carbon dioxide. I made aliphatic polycarbonates. And when I joined GE at that time had a plastics division, and they made aromatic polycarbonates. And I said, all right, I'm ideally positioned for this, which was a complete joke, right? It gave me some very good level fundamentals on what material systems were, but the processing, the methodologies were all different. And so it was very clear to me that I constantly had to learn. I constantly had to figure out how to communicate, always be open for new opportunities. Whenever a new opportunity came my way, I took it as a learning opportunity, as the way to grow. And that was absolutely critical. I'd say the one thing that I was not prepared for is going into industry, how I was evaluated. And when I reflect back to my PhD career, it was a lot more streamlined in the sense of, you want to get the best papers, you want to be able to get them into JACS and Science and some of the top journals out there. But in industry, it's not just quality science, it's teaming, it's values, it's value creation, it's scaling of the materials, its productization, it's stakeholder management, and communication, like the entire team is said. And you always have to be open to learn how to interact with both technical depth as well as breadth. You got to be able to build a diverse network. And I would say probably the number one thing is figuring out how to communicate to your audience, being able to communicate in their language, not in your language, because the more they understand it, the smarter they think you are, the better they understand it, and the better teaming you can have.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And finally, Professor Downhauer. Seems he may be frozen, so we'll move on for now, but we can potentially, oh, are you back?
Yes, can you all hear me? Okay. Yeah, the one thing I would add is that I think you get maybe a taste of this if you manage an undergraduate researcher while you're a graduate student or a postdoc, but managing people is an enormous challenge that there's just very little way to prepare you for the challenge of managing people. Even if it's just one or two people, you have to understand whether they have clear goals set, whether they have a path forward, whether they understand if they're making progress, and providing assessment and guidance as needed, but not too much guidance and assessment that they feel overwhelmed. And that's a very difficult thing. And I think it takes practice, and every person needs different leadership and management oversight. So learning that skill is something that I still work on and try to develop, but since graduate school, it's been very clear that that's needed.
Great. So for our audience, I know maybe the takeaway here is, oh, so much of what you're doing in grad school isn't going to translate, or there's all these skills that you also need to gain. But could you maybe all speak to a little bit of what are the skills that you did gain in grad school that have translated and have been very important, whether that is a specific technical domain or maybe some of the other more broad skills? And Professor Downhauer, if you'd like to continue the thread there.
I think it's not always easy to pinpoint one particular thing. I think I learned from my advisor how to write and how to present, but I think I continue to grow in all of those elements. I think what we see is there are new technical skills that are constantly being required as new tools become developed, like new spectroscopy capabilities or new simulation capabilities. I think we just have to constantly keep adding to our slate of skills that we have.
Dr. Moore.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think more than anything else, a PhD teaches you how to learn and solve problems, and that's key. And so that methodology, the way in which you employ that, is how you go into new opportunities and solve those really challenging problems. So again, it's that willingness to constantly grow, learn, and adapt.
Dr. Adine?
Yeah, I would echo with what David said. I think when I first came into the federal government, one of the people, I went to a webinar, a similar kind of situation, and there was a question about careers and how can a PhD do anything in a federal position. And one of the things that really stuck with me was, like, you have a PhD, you can learn, you can stay focused on a topic, and you will find out everything there is to know about it. You will get all the details about it. You will troubleshoot it when anything comes up, because that's what you're built to do. You are resilient. And that, who doesn't want an employee who's not going to come in and be focused and stick to those details and probably report out on way too much information on what's not going to work and what is going to work. I think it's a true, you may not, I'm not at a bench anymore. I don't have those technical, but that resilience, that drive, that push to want to figure something out and get it right is what I use every day, even though I'm not picking up a pipette pen or doing something like that.
Lovely, thank you. And Eric, you have the floor.
Yep, I totally agree with the other three panelists on that. That's I think a very general and valuable bit of advice. I'm also going to give some specific advice technically, which is there are a few types of technical skills that are very cross-cutting. And I found what I did in my very, very specific PhD, the things I did that use these skills I've used since in my career. And I'll give you a few examples: statistical analysis, programming and scripting. Learn a scripting language, even if you don't really program a lot. And visualization. Making beautiful pictures or making things very clearly imaged is incredibly valuable in many parts of life. So even if you learn it for a very specific use, you will find yourself using some of these things over and over again.
Excellent, thank you. And so now on the flip side, right, we have been also talking about some of the skills that you maybe start to pick up during your PhD, but really when you get into the workforce or to your next position, it becomes much more important. And could you talk a little bit all about how you gain those skills, kind of what that process looks like more specifically? Are you going to specific trainings and workshops, or are you getting this or learning this skill kind of through observation of a mentor or just informally through trial and error? If you could talk a little bit about kind of what those processes have been, and certainly I guess communication has been probably the biggest skill, but also the people management side are two that everybody's referenced so far. Dr. Moore, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's kind of all of the above that you talked about. But I'd say number one is hands-on experience. You just got to jump in and do it. That's the way that you learn the best. Trainings are wonderful, and trainings across a broad array of different things. It's not just technical, but it's legal aspects, it's communication, it's process like Six Sigma and value engineering. In legal side, intellectual property, patent law, freedom to practice, and freedom to operate. All of these things come together to better, really give you that depth of how to navigate in different areas. But I'll just go back to what I said before. When in doubt, say yes to new opportunities. The worst thing that can happen to you is that you find out you don't like something. And actually, that's great, because when you find out that you don't like something, that it steers you away from a particular direction, which means it steers you to something that you do like, or that hopefully you will like. To me, it's always, hey, new opportunity, say yes, take a chance.
Thank you. Professor Dowenhauer?
I think one skill that I've developed after my PhD was strategizing. If you look at anything you want to accomplish in business, in academia, in government, usually they're big projects you undertake. In academia, I'm writing a big grant proposal, or I'm trying to commercialize something. How do you get to a successful outcome requires preparation of some strategy, or else you're just going to bounce around between trying things. But if you can start out at least by strategizing and thinking, what are the pathways that would get me from where I am to where I want to be? A successful proposal, a successful project, a quality patent that could lead to a startup company. Now, how to do this? I think a mentor is really important here. I've had several very good mentors in academia and in industry, and they will help you basically walk through what are possible strategies and which ones have benefits and shortcomings. And sometimes when I start a new project, I'll just open up a PowerPoint and I'll start saying, okay, these are the pathways, these are the mechanisms I would need to get to where I want to be. And then I'll share that PowerPoint with people. I'll say, hey, like, this could be a company. This is what it would be. This is what we would focus on. Here are some problems. And just start laying out all of these pathways. That's something it's taken me a long time to learn, but a mentor has really helped me think about strategy.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Drager.
Yeah, I want to augment what David said about just getting in there and doing things like practicing things and trying things hands-on. For technical skills, this is for me, I've gained several skills through initially doing things like workshops and tutorials and reading books, but ultimately the only way these things really stick is if I find a real non-trivial problem and use that skill in it in anger. Like, you have to really just work through the use of these things in a way that makes sense to your research and your career, or else it's all theoretical. For non-technical, you absolutely just have to make yourself do it. So if it's networking at conferences or giving presentations, you're gonna probably not be that good at it at first, and it's very valuable to watch people who are good at it and see what they do. But at the end of the day, you just have to keep iterating. Just keep making yourself do it, make yourself practice, and you will get a lot better. It's unavoidable.
Dr. Dean.
I would go back to the idea about the mentoring kind of piece. I think opening yourself up that mentors aren't always people that are more senior than you. I've actually learned quite a bit from folks that are earlier career than I am. I've learned a ton when I was in the lab. I learned a lot from the graduate students that I was overseeing as a postdoc. And some of that was, technical things. They would come in with different ideas, but it's also a lot of soft skills. So I think being open to the fact that mentoring can come from all different areas and different types of people. I've learned from people who are, all across the board, whether it's scientific or technical or just learning management skills, and being open and flexible to that. I know sometimes we can get very stuck in the idea that it has to come from someone who's either more senior than us or someone who's in the same field of us. I think thinking more broadly and being very flexible, I think that's the one piece. What I'm hearing from all the other panelists is too, that flexibility and understanding that it's going to be a different world, after you're finished your PhD, and there's all these opportunities that are available to you. You have to be flexible and try things out and be uncomfortable. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable, I think, is one of the things that has driven me throughout the process. I'm a born introvert. I love my quiet time. But in this job, I talk to people all the time. And it's necessary as part of the job. So that being comfortable with the fact that I'm going to be uncomfortable when I'm trying something new is something that you just need to kind of embed into your life.
Excellent. Thank you. So one of the, topics that has come up now in a number of these answers is the importance of mentorship. And certainly for folks completing their PhDs right now, there's a very natural mentorship structure with their PhD advisor, potentially a co-advisor, collaborators. But I think in the world after your PhD, certainly you might have a manager, but it also is a little bit less regimented and a bit more open. And so I was wondering and hoping that all of you could talk a little bit about how you've navigated finding mentorship. And Dr. Dean has started this question already, but how you've navigated finding that mentorship, but then also leveraging, potentially even your advisor and group members from your PhD, but then going into and kind of growing your career from there. So if Dr. Dean would like to continue on that thread.
Sure. So I've been very fortunate to have a ton of really incredible mentors, and I said very diverse people. So my postdoctoral mentor was fabulous and was really willing to work with me when I kind of hit that wall and went, I don't think this bench work is for me in the long term. I think I need to think about something very different. And she was very willing to sit down with me and say, okay, let's figure it out and strategize where we were headed. When I did come into the federal government, I had a team of people that were working with me. I came into Basic Energy Sciences, which has a small piece of biology as part of it, but it's much more diverse. And I was willing and flexible to go in and be dumb. I mean, I think that was the nicest word to say, was to come in and say, I have no idea anything about this. Can you please teach me about it? And they would talk to me and discuss. And it's the great thing about scientists. We love talking about our science. I could bend your ear all day about the stuff that I work on whatever part of my career. But reaching out to people. And part of that for me was asking them, help me strategize where I'm headed next, or help me figure out what I'm doing right now so that I can hopefully improve on it. And having it always be a question and then going back and breaking it and then coming back and saying, okay, I broke that. It didn't work out that way. Can you help me figure it out? And that, again, that idea of just, there's an opportunity for a mentor in pretty much everything, and it doesn't always have to be your manager. It doesn't have to always be your direct colleague. It can be a lot of different people. I've learned a ton from a huge amount of people at the DOE who are not directly in my line of management. And you have to think about that as thinking more flexibly and thinking more broadly when it comes to mentorship.
Thank you. Dr. Drager.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I would say part of it is don't create too much expectation. Like, you don't have to expect to turn into every mentorship into a massively formal relationship. I mean, just start by going to people who you want and asking them to talk through ideas with you, or asking them for their advice on a specific thing. And go in being willing to be open about the fact that you don't know everything. I suffered, and I think a lot of people suffered from imposter syndrome early career, that if you told anyone in higher levels that you didn't understand something, they were going to call HR and have you fired. And that's just not a thing. So be open to just admitting that, you know, I've only done a little of this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. They're not going to teach you. They're not your professor, but they can at least guide you and point you to resources where, I mean, that's a huge starting point. Just having the keywords to start reading about often can be a differentiator. But like Dawn said, just have those conversations and create those relationships. You have to be active.
Dr. Moore.
Yeah, I'd like to build off of what Eric said. The imposter syndrome is definitely something that I suffered with, and I will always suffer with. And I think there is something that solves for that. It's a term that many of you may already know, but psychological safety. So this was something that came out in a Harvard Business Review. I think it's probably like 2014 or so, where it's all around trying to create an atmosphere where people can fail and aren't in trouble for failing. And I don't even like to use the word fail. It's not about failing, it's about learning, right? But you don't want people to feel like if they are learning that they're not doing their jobs. And so that was something that actually I was taught, and my advisor in graduate school didn't use the term psychological safety, but it was the way in which he operated. I remember him coming in and having 10 ideas a day for me to try. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get through all these ideas. And he was like, no. You need to prioritize what you think are those best ideas. And I want you to try them. I want you to fail. Because as a chemist, oh my gosh, for you chemists out there, 90% of what you do is failure. But it's not failure, it's learning. You're learning about what doesn't work so that you can move to the area that does work. Now, when I got to GE, I took that kind of philosophy and learned a lot more from the bosses, from the managers that I had. My first boss, extremely strategic, passionate, proactive, very operational, but also volatile and sometimes very difficult to work with because you didn't know what version you were going to get on a particular day. One of my other managers, very kind, caring, people person, always motivating. People absolutely loved working with this manager. But this manager lacked operational rigor and strategic foresight. And so to me, it was about combining all of these different relationships and leadership styles, and hopefully taking the best of them and not the worst of them and creating my own version of what leadership is. And I think, again, that psychological safety, trust, building that trust with your team, that it is okay to learn and fail and move forward is absolutely critical. And so it's a combination of all those that I think makes for the best type of leadership and as you get into your career.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know definitely the imposter syndrome is a very real thing that I think everybody's dealing with. So it's great to hear folks later on also addressing this. And finally, Professor Downhauer.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think the only thing I would add is, you know, when you leave your PhD, you're entering an organization, whether it be in government, industry, academia, and every organization has its own unique culture. And that's because, you know, there might be 30, 40, 50 people all interacting with each other, and every one-on-one relationship is complicated. On top of that is the company, you know, policies and regulations and building on top of that culture of how you communicate with people, how people move in their career. That is so complex, and it's not written down. The only way you can get that is by talking to people that are willing to discuss your career with you and say, well, within this culture, within this framework that we have in our organization, this might be the best path for you, or this project might be the best path forward. And that kind of insight can be incredibly valuable to get from somebody that would take you years to acquire just by being part of that organization.
Perfect. Thank you. I also want to take a brief moment and just remind folks in the audience to please use the Q&A function if you have questions that you'd like to ask our panelists as we're getting to the second half of this event. So yeah, just please do use that function if you have any questions, then we'll hopefully be able to answer some of them. In terms of the next question for our panelists, thinking about, again, going back to day one and starting this new position, you've just finished your PhD or your postdoc. What's something that you wish you had known at the beginning in kind of the early days of your career? It's either a piece of advice or a skill that you think was really important that you never really had the time to hone in your PhD. And Dr. Moore, if you'd like to begin on this round.
Yeah, the one quote that I like to use a lot to describe myself is that my passion is a blessing and a curse. And when things are going well, right, it's all gung ho. But when things are tough, it can be a drain, and it can be really mentally draining. So the one thing that I wish I had known early on in my current role, but also when I first started, is it's all going to be okay. You can be in tough spots, but you're going to get through it. It's a tough spot today. Tomorrow, next week, next month, it may not be. And as long as you're utilizing your network, you're communicating openly, transparently, teaming as best as you can, things will work out. I love what Dawn said earlier about, and the way I've always said it is be comfortable with discomfort. It's okay, right? It's okay to take it as learnings. In the end, as long as you're working hard and communicating and working with the right people, things will work out in your favor.
Professor Downhauer.
I think when I started my career, I had this belief that all of the uncertainty that we have in our profession, and we have it by definition because we are a research-focused group of people, whether in all parts of where we can work. We have uncertainty about how our work is going to come out, because obviously we don't know the outcome, but also we have all sorts of other uncertainties, like, am I going to be able to pay for this or afford that or have this opportunity? And that opportunity at the start feels so overwhelming. And at the same time, you just assume when you start that all of the people 20 years older than me don't have this anymore because they've been in it so long and all of these issues have been addressed. They have limitless funding. They know how their research is going to turn out. And that is absolutely not the case. What's changed is not the level of uncertainty, but my ability to deal with it from what I do personally, and just how I try to manage that level of anxiety. And that's something I wish somebody had told me when I was starting out, that look, this level of uncertainty is everyone has this, and you have to learn how to deal with it and make that part of your life where it doesn't consume you completely.
Dr. Adine.
So this is going to build a little bit on David's comment, but it may sound very obvious to other people, but the federal government is very bureaucratic and purposefully very, very slow. And I think early on, I came in very passionate and very excited, and, you know, with this kind of naiveness of that I'm going to change the world. And it beats you down very quickly. And I think I wish that I had paused. And I think this is true in other jobs, not just the federal government. Any job, there's red tape, there's things that you're going to try to do that aren't going to work. And you know that it would be better. And the process would be so much easier if we did it this way. But there's these little victories that you end up getting. And really, I think now that I'm further along in my career, I live for those little moments where things click and things are working, and not beat myself up so much or not get, kind of pulled back down because of the fact of things that aren't changing the way as quickly or as fast as I want to have them do that. I wish that I would have reveled in those early sort of small wins, that instead of just keep having my eye on the big prize of this is all the big things that need to be done, and really appreciated sort of those smaller victories along the way, because they do matter and they are important, and they keep you sane on the days when you realize that long-term goal is seems further than it ever will be. So the small victories are so important to stay focused on.
That's great. Thank you. And Dr. Jager.
I have no idea what Don's talking about. I work at a national lab, and we are the pinnacle of efficiency, and we don't even have bureaucracy. It's amazing. So I'd say the thing I wish I had learned or known when I first started, this really gets back to what Paul said earlier about understanding the culture of your organization. National labs are deeply collaborative organizations. People all across the lab are eager to sort of contribute, because it's different from academia, where success is ultimately at the hands of the individual PIs and professors. That's just not how our funding works. And I was very much in an academic mindset for probably way too long before I realized there's a ton of expertise of specialists that I could be leveraging. And I just sort of didn't even think about it for years. And in retrospect, I would have told my early self, go talk to the applied mathematicians or the computer scientists or now the machine learning experts, because you can't pick this up yourself anywhere nearly as effectively as they can sort of instruct or partner with you. So partnership and collaboration in my organization in particular was definitely something I should have done sooner.
Great, thank you all. Actually, I'm going to switch to a question from our audience, but I think this is a general theme that has come up, is that you very quickly kind of broaden your horizons following your PhD and postdoc. And they're wondering, how do you balance seeking breadth and depth, both in your PhD and maybe getting practice there, but then also beyond, and right, still having the deep technical expertise in whatever field you're working on at the moment, but having the breadth to be able to work with collaborators and folks from all across the board. Dr. Drager, if you'd like to start there.
Yeah, I would say early career, I would still weight depth over breadth. Like, you need to start opening up your horizons. But one of the mistakes we've seen is people who try and get too high too quickly. You don't have the foundation. Like, really, I think your strength in your later career comes from having solved several types of problems very deeply and understanding fields at a really low level. So while breadth is very important, don't try and get so broad that you're shallow. I think you really need to keep a deep focus in the early part of your career.
Professor Downhauer.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. I think we were talking just a minute ago, I think Eric was saying about the importance of collaboration. And I think there's levels of depth you need for each topic. And you have to know enough to be able to communicate to people and ask them questions on some topics, and some topics you're the expert. And I think that when you learn what you need to know or what level of depth and what point you just go ask somebody, that changes with time, as Eric was saying. But always keep in mind, okay, maybe I need to learn, maybe I need to go deeper on this topic. When do I make that? It depends on who I'm working with and the level of collaboration.
Dr. Dean?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, we all get very focused. And I think it's important to have that sort of depth, but it's that feeling that you've got to use your team. I mean, we talk about that a lot in my group that I work in, is that you have to use the team. I cannot know all the things that are out there. So my breadth is the fact that I talk to people and I get their information. So I call them cocktail conversations about certain topics. I could go out and I could sit next to someone on an airplane or go to a party and be able to have a very high level conversation about certain things. But if they get into my topic, I can bend their ear and tell them all about host microbe interactions, but if I'm talking about solar panels, it's totally different. I have a very little bit, but I've learned that by going and talking to people and using my team to be able to really support. It really is about getting that depth and being able to know what questions to ask is a huge piece before just immediately broadening out, because you really end up, you don't get that sort of like, here's the challenges I had, here's the question I need to ask so I can get that sort of more breadth. Yeah.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Miller.
Yeah, what I would say is early career, it is most important to become a go-to person in a relevant area. You don't want to become an expert in particle physics if what they need is a new polymer. You want it to be relevant. And I almost look at it as a hub and spoke type of model. You want to have this hub at which you could always go back to. And then slowly but surely, you want to connect that hub to multiple different other areas. Another analogy could be almost the amoeba model, where your amoeba just starts to grow. And as you build a skill set in one area, maybe you build a skill set later on in your career in another, and those kind of merge together like an amoeba. And that's the way you start to slowly grow and be able to leverage exactly what Dawn and the rest of the panelists said. Leverage your network to be able to grow and connect and answer the questions that you don't know. And it's okay. It's okay that you don't know it. Leverage your network in order to answer that and solve solutions as a collective group.
Thank you. And Professor Downhauer.
Yeah, I think I spoke about this a little bit. I think I agree with everything that's been said so far.
Perfect. So another question, and this is maybe switching gears a little bit, but I think especially Dr. Moore, you mentioned kind of looking at these leadership styles from two of your early mentors or managers and trying to blend that. But for a lot of people kind of coming out of their PhD, unless they have been managing either an undergrad as a PhD or potentially some master's students or PhD students as a postdoc, they don't necessarily have many skills or opportunities to be managing people. And so one of the questions from our audience is, how do you adapt your managing style to ensure that you're providing each individual with what they need? And how do you really determine what those individual needs are so that you can be an effective leader? And Dr. Moore, if you'd like to begin there.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is you have to ask. You need to get to know each person on a personal level. One of the best classes that I've ever taken in my life was at GE. Was a course called 4 Stages, and part of that they teach you about career orientations, and some of those career orientations are get ahead, get secure, get high, and that means high in the science, not in other ways, get free, and get balanced. And so you can kind of, I won't go into exactly what each of those mean, but each of those have to do with what you're ultimately looking for. Are you in a phase of your life where you just want to understand the technology? Do you want to get to that next level? Are you a person that wants to be rewarded commensurate with the level of activity that you have, and not more or not less? So you got to know thyself. And a manager who knows each of those people and what they're looking for is going to be the most effective manager. And through that, you establish trust. That trust is what enables people to want to not work for their manager, but work for the organization, work for themselves, work for everybody. That's how you develop a culture that is not a me culture. It's a we culture.
Great, thank you. Professor Dauenhauer, and you obviously have kind of two sides of this coin, both as an academic advisor to PhD students, but then also in kind of the startup world, as well as the center that you're a leader of.
I think David hit on so many good things there. I think just talking to people is one of the most important things. Regular communication. And as David said, trust, because if somebody is struggling with something, you want them to trust you that they'll share it. I'm struggling with this technically. I'm struggling with writing. I'm struggling with what I'm going to do. I have to go home or something this summer, and I don't, how does vacation work? Is he going to let me go on vacation? All these sorts of issues that are not just technical, they rely on communication and trust. And as a manager, you have to get to the point where you know someone well enough that you actually can assess them because you have enough information. And that's why there's a question of how many people you can effectively manage. You see in academia, some of the group sizes are quite enormous, and there's a fair question of how many people we can actually effectively manage. If we're going to do this effectively, we have to talk a lot with each other. So I think that's communication, of course, is number one, but then being able to assess what each person needs. Everybody needs something different. That is really difficult, and I think it'll take an entire career to develop this to the point where you could even say you're a master of it.
Dr. Traeger.
Yeah, just to build off that, I think that's a really astute point. Honestly, the most important first step of managing people is just acknowledging and recognizing that people are very different in how they like to communicate, how they like to work, what they need from their manager. It's very easy to try to overcompensate for bad managers you've had in the past and just do the opposite of that. But that's not necessarily doing anyone any favors. And the other thing is, don't do what feels the best in the moment or is easiest. The best managers sometimes have to have difficult conversations or point things out that are uncomfortable. And just a personal anecdote, when I started in physics, I was an experimental physicist and I sucked at it. And thankfully, my graduate school advisors just said, I'm not kicking you out of the group, but just realize you're going to take forever to get a PhD because you clearly are not great at this. But he noticed the programming tasks I'd taken, I'd really liked. He's like, why don't you just go do that? And it really changed my life. I will always be grateful to him for sitting me down early and not just letting me flounder, which he could have. So.
And Dr. Dean.
I will agree with everything everyone else has said. I think it's very challenging to, I have a different view of management. So I manage projects with PIs. Some of them need and want to be very talkative with them. I have one that calls me on a regular basis. I have others who would just give, I'll take the money, I'll send you my progress report, we're good to go. And understanding that. I've worked for micromanagers before. They drive me insane. But I also have friends of mine and colleagues of mine who prefer that. They want someone to be like constantly on, it is a challenge as a manager to figure it out. And it's a lot of trial and error. But as a manager, being able to say, hey, I'm not really sure what you need from me. So help me help you. Like, what kind of things do you need? Do you need me to meet with you weekly? Do you need me, or do you just want hands off and me to touch base with you once a month or one, I think that's the piece is being open to the fact that you don't have all the answers and you're not going to be able to do the same management for everyone. I worked for someone who tried to do that. It was unsuccessful for them. You can't treat everybody the same because we're all unique, different individuals. And so you need to have that willingness to be flexible and to figure out what each person is. And it's hard. And I agree with Paul. I will never master it. I think it's one of those things that's going to be a constantly continue work in progress of trying to figure out how best to work with people and to get them motivated to do what needs to be done.
Great. Thank you all for your very thoughtful answers. On the flip side of kind of the people management, as you have kind of expanded in breadth post PhD, postdoc, one thing that I'm wondering about is how you have kind of stayed abreast to rapidly changing scientific fields and broad scientific fields. And I know as students, it can be hard to even stay abreast to the current literature in your own very specific area. And so how do you manage that, and kind of what are the skills that you've cultivated to stay abreast to all the different changes? And maybe it's different levels, but I'll leave it at that and see what you have to say. Dr. Drager, if you'd like to begin.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, as you get into a primarily leadership or management role, you have to, in some sense, let go. You're not going to have your finger on the pulse of every aspect of things. So honestly, the main skill there is humility. You don't have to say, I don't know anything, but at the same time, let go of the assumption that you're the person who should speak first, and just sort of be open to hearing from others, maybe people who are more junior than you, what their perception of the best way to solve a problem or the latest advances in the field. But I mean, unfortunately, that's something I don't know if there's an easy or pat answer to. It's fundamentally you just only have so much time in a day, and you have to let go of something.
Dr. Dean, I see you nodding your head vigorously. If you have any other comments or disagreement.
I'm mainly agreeing. I think it's very hard. I mean, especially in the federal government space where I have a portfolio of projects that are quite distinct from each other and very broad. I mean, yes, they all fall underneath a general category, but I can't know everything. And I think we hold workshops. We do our best to try to bring in experts. I mean, obviously, reviewers and the scientific community are essential to us being able to do our jobs well, because the folks out, people on this call, as well as the folks on this panel and beyond, they're the experts, in all the different topic areas, and we bring them in to help inform us. But it's hard. And there are days where I feel like, man, I should be reading more. I should be, why don't I, and then something comes up and there's a fire drill that comes down that you've got to stay focused on, and it has to be done in 2 hours. And you're like, okay, well, I guess I won't be reading today. It can be, as a scientist and a giant nerd, it's hard to give that up. But you have to, you do what you can. There's only so many hours in the day. I think that's a great thing to say that Eric said, but it truly is. You have to have that humility of understanding that you're not going to be necessarily the expert forever, especially in a job where I am.
Great, thank you. Dr. Moore, I don't know if you have a different perspective on this coming from more of an industry background.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Eric said it well. I think Elsa, said it well too. Let it go, right? You have to just be able to trust your team and learn from them. But I do think that conferences and that way is a tremendous way to network and get a lot of information quickly from a broad group of people, and then leveraging that network. I think about the air to water project. So Somil, who you can see on the screen there, is part of this larger team that we have, a DARPA funded program. That's a community that we've established where the team is constantly talking about the latest within that particular field. You get deep as deep as you can in those particular fields, and sometimes areas that you did in the past, you got to let them go. And every now and then get abreast if it becomes more relevant to the particular work that you're doing. But I'd say it's network, conferences, and being open to, open up, look at your phone in the morning and get a couple key websites that you trust. Go into the science areas or whatever the technology areas, the business areas, make those connections and read.
Thank you. And Professor Downhauer.
Yeah, I agree with all what's been said. I think I would add that you're going to get more efficient in how you go through things with time. I think back what I was doing in grad school when I would read a paper, I would print it off. Back then we had to print it off, sit with a cup of coffee for an hour and read that paper. I would never do that now. I would first go through it and maybe within 4 minutes be like, okay, I get the main points here. I'm going to set this one aside in case I actually need those details. Right. Same thing with proposals. I know very quickly now whether I should spend my time on it or not. But the other point I think was touched on is that there are networks we can use to help us not miss things, is how I would put it. You're not going to cover everything, but you're not going to miss it maybe, or you reduce the likelihood you'll miss it. And you can do that with social media. So Twitter and LinkedIn are good sources. If you have a network on there of people that will point out really good papers that came out, something new that you should have caught. But also an email network of friends that'll be like, hey, check out this paper. I get papers, people send me things all the time. Hey, did you see this paper? Those are efficiencies you can use to get through more material. But again, I think what was said first is the right thing. You're not going to be able to do all of this. So you've got to have partners that you just trust and you rely on.
Thank you. And this actually segues nicely into another question that I have. And I think increasingly, the importance of networks is so important, both for finding job opportunities and collaboration potential, and as you just mentioned, staying abreast to kind of the current state of the art. Could you all talk a little bit about maybe some of the skills around growing and developing and nurturing your networks, especially if, I guess, for some of our audience who feel like they don't necessarily have access to full networks already, or not really sure how to get started. So Professor Downhauer, if you'd like to begin there.
Yeah, I think honestly, social media, I know it has all sorts of negatives. It has a lot of positives for industry, academia, people in government. It allows you to approach people that maybe would only be possible at a conference. And even then it's quite challenging to walk up to somebody and meet them. But I wrote a whole paper on the benefits of social media for academia. And despite all of its negatives, it has a huge upside in allowing you to connect with people. And I tell people, the first thing is people have to know you exist, right? And social media allows you to connect with people. So at the very minimum, they know you exist, and you go from there, I think.
Thank you. Dr. Moore?
Yeah, I would say that your technical capabilities unlock a door, but it's the people and the relationships that allow that door to actually be opened for you. And so I completely agree with Paul that social media is a great way to do it. Two of the biggest developments that have happened with me have been cold calls via one by email, and another one through LinkedIn. Professor Omar Yagi at UC Berkeley. I cold called him, and it developed into a very, very impressive relationship that we're working on with Somil. Another colleague of mine, it's actually now developing into a much larger partnership through GE that is growing exponentially, and that was through LinkedIn. Randomly contacted this individual through LinkedIn. We started a communication, and it spawned just an unbelievable relationship. So don't be afraid to utilize social media and any tools at your disposal to communicate and connect.
Thank you. Dr. Udine?
I would also encourage utilizing your associations and your societies that you're already part of. I know when I first came to DC, I was brand new to the town, and I was doing something completely different that I, wasn't related. I was meeting a lot of people that were not microbiologists or in the biology field in general. I joined the Association for Women in Science. That's the DC chapter here is very strong. Just going to meetings and meeting people across so that I could see what they were doing, I think was really helpful. I also used my society to try to, when I went to conferences and stuff, of trying to find my niches in those to try to expand. I would also say that the fellowship program that brought me to DC, the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, has built-in networking. And it's a tremendously powerful group of folks that, there's listservs and there's all these kinds of things. And you come into it and it's sort of already in there of learning how to network. They actually have whole workshops of how to improve and how to do those things as sort of part of that fellowship experience. If I hadn't had those, I think I'd be a lot more behind the game. Because of that fellowship, I was able to. So, making that jump or looking for those opportunities that are a little bit different, and utilizing the tools at your disposal is really powerful and helpful.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Traeger.
Yeah, so I think networking, when it's really successful, is a really kind of interesting mix of total serendipity and randomness, and then very strategic and focused effort. And David's example of a cold call of someone who knows something you think would work really well with what you want to do is a perfect example of the latter. But also at the same time, I know many collaborations started because someone knew someone else and they just happened to have met at a workshop or talked at a poster session and just, oh, let me send you that person's email. And next thing you know, they're working on a big project together. So make yourself do the work, go to workshops and conferences and approach people. I mean, poster sessions I love, mixer type things are a little harder for some people, but a poster session is great because the person is there to talk to you. So just make yourself go up and engage and learn and see if there's a there. And if not, move on. So I think that's important.
Great, thank you. So as we're wrapping up, I wanted to give everybody one last opportunity. If you had a piece of parting advice or something that you wanted to say or hope to be able to have the opportunity to say, but that didn't come up, and then we'll wrap up from there. So Dr. Traeger, if you'd like to continue the thread.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to be very selfish and just tell you that the DOE National Labs are awesome places to work if you have a PhD. So come work at ideally Livermore, but honestly, any of them. We have summer internships if you're a grad student. We have many opportunities for postdocs. Just find someone you're interested in on the website and send them an email. We're desperate for smart people. So that's very self-serving, but I figured this audience should keep that in mind.
Thank you. Professor Downhauer.
Yeah, I think, one of the problems we have is there's an infinite number of things we can pursue academically and industrially. It goes on forever. So the question is, how do I base my decision on something meaningful? And I think people are motivated a lot by excitement. I look at what I could do, the slate of options, things that are fundable, things that I can actually do with my skills. Which one of those excites me is the one I'm going to want to spend a lot of time on, for years possibly. And that's really important. If you're not excited by something you're working on, it's going to be very hard to do it to a level that's competitive.
Thank you. Dr. Moore.
Yeah, I'd say that every problem can be solved, and don't be afraid to embark on every single problem that's out there. It may take one day, it may take 10 years, but if you're passionate about it, look in the mirror. What do you really want? And don't be afraid to delve deep into what makes you happy and what your ultimate goals are, and then go and get it. That's what I would say.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Adine.
I think my thing would be is to remain flexible. I think there is so many times we have a plan. With me especially, I had a plan of what I was going to be doing and where it was going to go and where I was going to be 10 years, 20 years, beyond that. And if there's anything that I've learned in my years so far, is that the plan is great. It sets a goal, but you have to be flexible and you have to be able to shift that target. And take those risks. I am not a risk taker. I like to be in a very comfortable position, preferably in a quiet place. But I have the goal here is to be, to take those risks. And if you've got to be willing to feel uncomfortable, you have to be willing to so you can hit the goals that you want to hit, or the ones that you don't even know yet. So be flexible and be okay with being uncomfortable, I think, is the other thing I really want to tell you all. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's a huge thing. It doesn't feel good, but it will get you further in life.
Perfect. Thank you so much. A big thank you to our 4 panelists. You're volunteering your time, but I hope that you enjoyed this. I know I certainly did. I learned a lot, and hopefully the audience feels the same way. I would also like to give a big thank you to the support of DOE BES, and in particular, Robin Hayes, Adrian Gaskin, and our whole organizing committee. And lastly, we'd like to thank you, the audience, for attending. As I said, hopefully you found this to be an informative and helpful discussion, and I hope that everybody has a great weekend. Take care.